The Faroe Islands. From precipitous cliffsides to deeply cut fjords, winding coastal roads to quaint villages, the Faroe Islands are a rugged archipelago brimming with dancing clouds, dramatic waterfalls, and energetic sheep. Follow us on our road trip as we explore the fairy tale landscapes of this windswept island group. In the North Atlantic, west of Norway, southeast of Iceland, and north of Scotland, the Faroes are a group of 18 islands. From Viðoy in the north to Suðuroy in the far south, their total landmass stretches for just about 113 kilometers. Our journey through the Faroe Islands started by disembarking the vehicle ferry in the port of Tórshavn. Home to almost 40% of the population, Tórshavn is by far the largest city, as well as the administrative center of the islands. Its status as capital goes back to the 9th century, when the Norse established their first parliament on a small peninsula in the harbor. Since then, the rocky outcrop carries the name Tinganes, meaning as much as Parliament Jetty. Most of the buildings that can be seen there today aren't quite as old though, as they go back to the 16th and 17th centuries. Their red color combined with the characteristic sod roofs makes for quite a picturesque sight. Despite its importance for the island as a political and economic hub, Tórshavn is far from a bustling metropolis. In large parts, it has retained a small-town character and can easily be explored on foot. Leisurely wandering around, we soon stumbled upon Skansen, a historic fortress which has protected the city since the 16th century. Its strategic position was also appreciated by the British, who set up base here during World War II. From our vantage point, we look directly onto the neighboring island of Nólsoy, which can easily be visited by taking a ferry. 20 minutes after setting out, we already approached the island's only village, which, unsurprisingly, goes by the same name. Just about 250 people call this settlement home, a considerable part of which takes the ferry to work each day. Strolling around the narrow streets, we took in the peaceful atmosphere of the village. Of course, there are also a couple of hiking paths on the island, one of which leads over the highest peak. As the weather was rather unpredictable though, we instead opted for a casual walk. Back on the island of Streymoy, it was time for us to leave Tórshavn behind and head north towards Eysturoy. To get there, we took a tunnel that is known for having the world's first underwater roundabout. Once on the opposite side, we drove along some rural trails, fully enjoying the scenery. Later that day, we set up camp in a serene village. However, the silence of the evening was suddenly broken by an infectious laughter echoing around the rocks. The reason were 3 locals taking a dip in the roughly 8-degree cold water. Needless to say, we immediately felt inspired by their courage and equally decided to give this ice bath a go. The only one confused by the sudden conundrum was a grey seal swimming close by. Pushing further north, we headed towards Klaksvík the next day. With roughly 5,000 inhabitants, this is the Faroe's second largest town. Following a narrow road, we drove uphill until arriving at a trailhead above the city. From there, an easy hike leads to the summit of Klaksvík, the most prominent local peak. Even though the weather was rather moody, the scenery was impressive. This was especially true looking towards the island of Kalsoy, which, in our mind, evoked the image of a partially submerged dragon. Often referred to as the Northern Isles, the 6 islands of Kalsoy, Kunoy, Borøy, Viðoy, Suðuroy and Fugløy are well known for their remote fishing villages, rugged shoreline and scenic roads. Excited to discover more of them, we headed through a dark tunnel before, to our surprise, emerging to beautiful sunshine. For the first time, we had the chance to take in the marvelous coastline in fair weather. Just a short drive away, we arrived in Viðoy, the northernmost settlement of the island group. The tranquil village sits on an isthmus framed by 2 high mountains, exuding an air of unwavering calm. The surrounding landscape, on the other hand, is immensely spectacular, with prominent peaks rising hundreds of meters from sea level. Driving along the shore on a sunny day was a sheer delight. Looking out over the large fjord, we also spotted several fishing vessels returning to harbour. Due to their remote location, the Faroese always had to rely on locally available food sources. For centuries, fishing has been an important industry for these islanders. Nowadays, seafood products make up a vast chunk of international exports, earning the Faroe Islands the title as the largest fishery nation per capita in the world. Contributing to that are also the somewhat controversial fish farms which have sprung up just about everywhere. Making the most of the fabulous weather, we explored as many countryside trails as we could. Sometimes, however, these little roads led us across unexpectedly narrow bridges. In the afternoon, it was time for us to board a small vehicle ferry, as the island of Kalsoy is not connected via any tunnel, bridge or causeway. Leaving the jetty behind, we caught a glimpse of Klaksvík from the seaside perspective. Within moments, however, we entered the open fjord and headed straight for Kalsoy. "20 minutes after setting out, we made ready for landfall on our 7th Faroese Island. In principle, there's only one major road on the island, connecting the villages of Mikladalur in the south with Tröllanes in the north. Those 17 kilometers of road are a real joy to drive though. That is, as long as you are not afraid of single-lane tunnels, as there are no less than 4 of these to pass through. Having made it to the end of the road, we set out on a walk. Soon we found ourselves surrounded by sheep in a landscape of magnificent beauty. In a nutshell, the scenery captured the very essence of the Faroe Islands. There is not a single animal more important for the locals than sheep. They form an absolutely integral part of the local culture. As a matter of fact, the name Faroe Islands is commonly translated to Sheep Islands, highlighting their significance. Since the islands were first settled, farmers have kept flocks of sheep, supplying them with both wool and meat. Belonging to a small and hardy breed, these sheep roam freely most of the year. No matter if blissful sunshine or raging storm, their bleating is a constant auditive companion when traveling around the islands. While sheep wool did fetch a high price in past centuries, cotton and synthetic materials have largely replaced it in the fashion industry. For that reason, many sheep are left to shed their wool naturally nowadays. Sometimes that results in an absolutely ridiculous hairstyle. Continuing along a small path, we slowly made our way uphill until we arrived at the Kallur Lighthouse. One of the most famous attractions of the Faroe Islands, the lighthouse sits below a staggering bluff that drops more than 500 meters to sea level. Unsurprisingly, a scenery as stunning as this has not escaped the attention of Hollywood. Most recently, James Bond, No Time to Die, was filmed on this island. To commemorate that, a tombstone was placed here, which is equally popular among tourists and locals.
Today is one of those rare days in the Faroe Islands that everything seems to come together. Instead of the usual rain and clouds, we have beautiful sunshine, and as a result, all the landscapes are completely transformed. And looking at these cliffs right here, no matter which perspective I take them in from, they are one of the most spectacular I have ever seen.
Spellbound by the view, we spent several hours simply taking in the landscape. In the meantime, thousands of seabirds swirled around the cliffs, creating a mesmerizing atmosphere. To our joy, we even spotted some puffins. As the day progressed and afternoon turned to evening, the sun started to cast a radiant light. Especially the rock faces began to glow, which further increased their breathtaking splendor. The next morning, we woke up to melodious chatter, while the clouds slowly drifted past the mountains. Matching our rhythm to that of the island, we calmly strolled through the village of Mikladalur. Nowadays, not even 30 inhabitants call this settlement home. Before long, we came upon a small waterfall. The most famous sight of the town, however, is the statue of a Selkie, a shape-shifting seal woman. According to local legends, seals were humans who voluntarily ended their lives in the ocean. Once every year, they were allowed to return to land, where they would strip off their seal skins and celebrate as humans. Witnessing their exuberant dance, a young farmer stole the skin of a beautiful Selkie maiden. Hiding the sealskin in a tightly locked chest, the local man forced the Selkie to be his wife for many years. Eventually, the young woman escaped, returning to her family in the ocean. But before long, the villagers went out on a hunt, killing both her seal husband and their children. Overcome by grief, the Selkie maiden shouted the following curse.
Now there shall be revenge! Revenge on the men of Mikladalur! And some will die at sea! And others will fall from the mountain tops, until there be as many dead as can link hands all around the shores of the Isle of Kalsoy!
Still pondering the implications of that story, we set out across the island once more, as it was time for us to board the ferry. It didn't take long before we left the charming villages and imposing mountains behind. Back in Klaksvík, we made ready for a second goodbye. The previous day, we had met Xenia and Stan from St. Petersburg at our campsite. It quickly became obvious that, irrespective of our personal backgrounds, overlanders from around the world share the same passion for exploration and intercultural learning.
Rocky Mountains.
After many shared laughs, we bade them farewell and started the next leg of our trip, which would bring us to the northern part of Eysturoy. Setting out on a rather scenic road, we soon headed towards the village of Oyndarfjørður. The views along the way did not disappoint in the slightest. As elsewhere in the Faroe Islands, it was the natural serenity that truly enraptured us. Surrounded by the sound of falling water and the many-voiced calling of shorebirds, we took in the magnificent play of the clouds. One valley over, another coastal road provided us with equally staggering sights. The drive to Elduvík is well known as one of the most dramatic of the Faroe Islands. The village itself is rather quaint and, as such, a perfect place to sit down and relax. Our day was far from over though, and so we soon found ourselves climbing up a narrow mountain road. It was extremely fascinating to contemplate how all the valleys and fjords were carved by giant ice sheets. Originally, not unlike Iceland, the Faroe Islands were born out of volcanic activity. However, as a consequence of several ice ages, this former plateau was chiseled into an archipelago with deep fjords and precipitous cliffs. Now, the result of the glacier's tireless work unfolded directly in front of us. One of these ice-sculpted dales lies the village of Gjógv. Meaning as much as gorge or crevice, Gjógv was named after its natural harbour. Of course, this convenient feature has long made the area a popular place to settle. For centuries, people have made a living from fishing, and to this day, it is common to find fish hanging on the walls of houses. The reason for that is simple: to conserve a protein-rich food source. To achieve that, pairs of fish are bound together and left to dry in the wind for a couple of weeks. Known as rastor fiskur, this dish is a staple of the Faroese cuisine. Other than air-dried fish, the area is also known for its natural wonders. A popular hiking track leads steeply up the mountainside, soon offering a sweeping vista.
I think one of the most profound experiences one can have on the Faroe Islands is to enjoy the magic of being alone. There are many opportunities here to sit down at the end of a hiking trail and simply listen to the sounds of nature, be it the bleating of the sheep, or the gawking of the seagulls, or the sound of the waves smashing against the rock. I have just set out to climb to the top of the highest peak of the Faroe Islands, but as the mountain is only 880 meters high, this isn't the most daunting of tasks. However, on a sunny day such as this, it is said that one can see the entirety of the Faroe Islands, so I'm really looking forward to see what's up there.
The 2-kilometer long path to the summit of Slættaratindur climbs up roughly 500 meters, but all in all, it is only moderately challenging.
The view from up here definitely does not disappoint. Looking into this direction, I can see all the northern isles which we have visited in the last days, whereas over here there are plenty of peaks, and in the far distance I can even make out the southernmost island of the Faroe Islands. But just in general, what a magnificent vista this is.
From the flat top of the mountain, I enjoyed a 360-degree panorama of the neighboring peaks. At this altitude, there were even some small patches of snow. Most striking, however, was the outline of the northern isles in the distance. On the road once more, we carried on towards Eyði, where we intended to stay for the night. Unlike in other Scandinavian countries, wild camping is strictly forbidden in the Faroes. As a result, all visitors have to stay on established campgrounds. The most unusual of these is the one in Eyði, which is located on a former football field. While the view is already formidable from the pitch, it gets even better when climbing the local hill. From there, a wonderful perspective of the surrounding cliffs opens up. Additionally, plenty of seabirds can be seen breeding on tiny rock ledges. Looking down, two famous sea stacks came into sight, the Giant and the Witch. Even though they may not look large compared to the massive wall of rock, they measure a respectable 70 meters in height. Despite that, there is a high likelihood that the two-legged witch will crumble under the onslaught of a ferocious winter storm in the next decades. Waking up to sunshine yet again, the astonishingly long streak of good weather became almost spooky. A direct result of the little rainfall was that even the most famous of Ferry's waterfalls carried barely any water. More often than not, Fossá is a raging torrent. However, when we visited, it was more of a tame trickle. Still, standing at 140 meters tall, this cascading waterfall is the highest of the Faroe Islands. Arguably, it is also one of the most beautiful. Continuing northwards, a single-lane road led us to the village of Tjørnuvík. The picturesque settlement is nestled in a towering mountain bowl that opens up to a shallow bay. On a clear day, the giant and the witch can easily be spotted in the distance. The sleepy tranquility of the village is occasionally interrupted by tourists, but generally, this is a place of deep quiet. Truthfully though, the same can be said about almost every Faroese village. Driving through a vast, glacier-carved valley north of Suðuroy, we followed the course of a meandering river towards the settlement of Saksun. Due to its scenic environment and lovely church, Saksun has become a popular tourist destination. On any given day, the amount of visitors far outnumbers the remaining inhabitants. This has definitely led to some resentment among local farmers, who see their pastures trampled by unsuspecting travelers. Initially, the village was known for its sheltered harbour. However, a heavy storm swept large amounts of sand into the bay. It is still possible to walk to the open ocean, but for that you need to tap your credit card at this very gate. Not overly keen to do that, we instead took in the mountainscape and watched a flock of geese forage for food. Having explored the north of the Faroe Islands, it was now time for us to head west towards the island of Vágar. Interestingly, this is where most tourists arrive, as the international airport is located here. Just a stone's throw away from the airport, an absolutely striking vista welcomes travelers. Rising steeply out of the sea and adorned with a rugged crown, Tindhólmur is one of the Faroes' most prominent isles. Because of its small size, it is not one of the 18 official islands, but rather counted as part of the Skerries and Islets. Most of the year, Tindhólmur is uninhabited, but some are lucky enough to have their summer houses on the outcrop. At least equally as fascinating are the nearby sea stacks known as Drængarnir. Together, both formations create one of the most iconic Faroese landscapes. Following the road even further west, we drove through a long tunnel. Before its opening in 2003, the settlement of Mikladalur was one of the most isolated in Europe. Luckily, today the road does not only provide access to the village, but also to the captivating Múlafossur. Fed by a small stream, the waterfall plunges 30 meters over the edge until it is swallowed by the Atlantic Ocean. Completely bewitched, we spent hours losing ourselves in this real-life painting. And then our daydream was suddenly interrupted by some movement. Just a few meters away, a puffin had come out of its burrow. During the summer, from roughly May to September, puffins use the grass-covered slopes along the coastline to lay their eggs and to raise their chicks. The largest number of puffins on the Faroes can be found on Mykines, but as of recently, their colony can only be visited on a guided tour. Having returned to Suðuroy, we continued our pursuit of finding the smallest mountain road possible. Following an increasingly impressive track, we eventually ended up on a plateau. Rising over 700 meters, the nearby peaks are among the tallest of the islands. At this altitude, the weather changes quickly, so it wasn't a surprise when wafts of clouds started to move in, partially veiling the landscape. Slowly running out of roads to explore on the central islands, we decided that the time had come to head south. Literally translating to South Island, Suðuroy marks the southernmost extension of the archipelago. To get there, we returned to Tórshavn, where we boarded a large vehicle ferry.
Dear passenger, the captain and crew wish you welcome on board the Suðuroy. Estimated sailing time is 2 hours. We wish you a pleasant trip.
After we had almost unfathomably good weather in the last 5 days, we are now back to something that's a bit more on brand for the Faroes, but to be frank, looking at these dramatic clouds moving quickly through the landscape, that's quite nice for a change as well.
In fact, the clouds created a mystical ambience, evoking images of Nordic saga heroes fighting long-forgotten battles. While our fog-inspired thoughts ran wild in the realm of fantasy, the world around us was much harder to see. Fortunately, the strong wind regularly tore gaps into the marching wall of clouds, opening up views of Osmundarstakur, a tall sea stag in the north of the island. Misty cliffs behind, we headed south until we came upon a very unusual sight. Generally speaking, the Faroe Islands are entirely devoid of forests. In the past, a few tree species eked out a living in this harsh oceanic climate. However, since the arrival of man, no native forests remain. That is why we were all the more surprised to come upon a small woodland along the roadside. Strolling below the canopy of leaves, we delighted in the change of scenery. It almost felt as if the trees offered us a portal to a more sheltered world, far away from the windswept crags of the island. Emerging from our little forest retreat, we continued to explore every road we could find. One of these trails led us towards the village of Fossá. Framed by high mountains on three sides, the small settlement faces the Atlantic Ocean on the fourth. The single-lane road leading to and from the village was both narrow and winding, but an immense joy to drive. So far we had explored most of the northern part of the island, so naturally it was time to head south. Instead of taking the tunnel to the southernmost point of the island, we opted for the old mountain route. Before long, we started to be engulfed by mist, with visibility dropping to a few meters. Luckily, as we continued to climb up further, we slowly broke through the cloud cover. And then, almost as if nature was casting a spell on us, we came upon a mind-boggling spectacle. A swift-flowing river of mist fearlessly plunged down the precipitous cliff edge, creating an ocean-bound cloudfall of jaw-dropping grandeur. Standing at the edge of the bluff, we felt like characters in a fantasy novel, ready to embark on an epic quest for a long-lost kingdom. The only ones completely unfazed by the natural extravaganza were the shaggy sheep feeding in the meadow. Once we managed to tear our eyes away from the clouds, we also noticed the hundreds of seabirds flying below. Still somewhat in disbelief, we left the mountain pass behind and started our downhill journey. The road led us all the way to Sumba, a picturesque village in the far south of the island. From there, it was just a short drive to Ökraberg, the southernmost point of the Faroe Islands, where a lighthouse has been guiding ships since 1909. The next morning, we left Suðuroy behind, boarding the vehicle ferry that would bring us back to Tórshavn. Along the way, we passed Lítla Dímun, one of the Faroe's 2 uninhabited islands. Due to its steeply rising walls, it was never settled by humans, instead belonging fully to the birds. And because everything else is unthinkable, to the sheep. Around 200 are brought to the island each spring and gathered again before winter arrives. Back on Streymoy, we immediately set out to explore some of the few roads we hadn't driven yet. On one of these coastal trails, we spotted the island of Kalsoy in the distance. Its interesting shape immediately caught our attention, as did the clouds smoothly flowing over the lonely mountain. A little further south, the village of Tjørnuvík is the most important historical site of the Faroes. Here, visitors will find the medieval St. Olaf's Church. Built in the 12th century, this is by far the oldest house of worship in all the islands. Surpassing even the church in age, the adjacent farmhouse goes back to the 11th century. In all likelihood, this makes it the oldest inhabited wooden house in the world. Fascinatingly, the entire farm has been in the hands of the same family for a staggering 17 generations. The trinity of the village's historical attractions is completed by the ruins of the Magnus Cathedral. Almost young in comparison, this Catholic church dates back to the year 1300. Historians still debate if the building was ever fully completed. What is fairly certain, however, is that the cathedral was left to decay after the Reformation reached the Faroe Islands. Of course, the unforgiving elements took up that task with a vengeance, until conservation work was initiated in 1997. At this point of our trip, only one major island remained unexplored, Suðuroy. Because the subsea tunnel was still under construction, we took the vehicle ferry to cross over. Once on the island, we quickly found ourselves on some very thrilling trails. As a matter of fact, Suðuroy turned out to have some of the most spectacular shoreline drives of all the islands. The most exciting of these was the road to the tiny settlement of Skarvanes, which, in parts, was barely wide enough for a single car. A lot easier to reach is Sandur, the largest town of the island. Leading west from town, a small track brought us to a very secluded beach, which offered great views of a sea stack in the distance. Additionally, a flock of Arctic tern was resting on the rocky shore. clearly confused by our presence, they repeatedly took to the air, loudly voicing their unfounded concerns. Sitting down on the grassy slope, we calmly watched their aerial dance performance, reminiscing the incredible adventures we had had. During the 16 days of our journey, we traveled more than 1,000 kilometers across 10 of the 18 Faroese Islands. In our travels, we are often driven by an irresistible urge to chase one highlight after another. Every day must be more exciting, each mountain, cliff or waterfall more spectacular than the last. Without a doubt, we won't forget the grand coastlines and delightful villages. But there is another element that truly made our visit special. Teaching us the gift of contentment, we learned a valuable lesson in the Faroes. That sometimes it is best to take pause and to simply embrace the peace and quiet.